Good day to all of you. I'm Dr. Tolosa, and today we're going to talk about writing the research paper. At the end of this session, you, as the participant, are expected to be able to describe the usual format of an original research paper, recognize the main parts of a research paper and the appropriate content of each part, familiarize yourselves with reporting guidelines, and identify specific writing tips and how-tos. The first question you have to deal with is, what do you intend to publish? We know that there are many different types of publications, and these include review articles, perspective, commentaries, and opinion pieces, and even rapid communications. And the characteristics of each are shown on this table. However, the one that is most relevant to us would be the original research paper. And this will be because by the end of this course, you are expected to have completed your research and reported it to the department for possible dissemination and publication in later times. These are original full-length research papers which have not been published previously, except in a preliminary form by way of news or update. It is often advised that these papers not exceed 7,500 words, including allowance for no more than 6 tables and illustrations, and generally they follow the IMRAD format. The next question you need to answer is, where do you intend to publish? This is relevant because when your obligation to the department is done, when your academic requirements have been satisfied, you would like to see this work published somewhere. And usually, your target journal will dictate or guide on how you will write it because there are very specific instructions to authors and they differ from journal to journal. Now, you may wonder, what general standards do journal editors and reviewers uphold when they evaluate a manuscript? The answer to this question includes the following: compliance with their instructions to authors, adherence to manuscript requirements as recommended by the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, the ICMJE, significance of the study to the target specific community, novelty and originality, adequacy of title and abstract, methodologic and statistical rigor and validity, soundness and value of conclusions and interpretation, and of course the writing style, length, and organization. And you see here that many parts that will actually be on target or review are parts that could be fixed or made well as early as the protocol stage. And at this point, we cement our learning that we should not go easy on our efforts. We should actually do our best even at the point when we're starting our protocols. The format of the manuscript for an original research article would include the following: title, abstract, and then what we call the IMRAT: introduction, materials and methods, results, and discussion. These are followed by the references and then acknowledgements. The basic structure and contents would look like this. The introduction would explain why you did the study and its objectives. You don't have a separate section where you write the objectives the way that you do in the protocol. And then the methods will describe how you did it, the results, what you found out. The discussion would delve into the implications of the findings or the interpretation in the context of other literature. And then for references, you're advised to get the most relevant and the most recent. not textbook material as much as possible. So roundabout you get 20 to 35 references. And then you'd have acknowledgments and then your tables and figures. Usually the total pages would come around to 12 or 20, but this of course will change depending on journal. Pop quiz. Look at this statement. Because it is the first part of the manuscript, the title must be written first. True or false? Like every well-written story, a scientific manuscript should have a beginning, the introduction, a middle, the materials and methods, and an end, the results. The discussion, which is actually like the moral of the story, puts the study in perspective. The abstract is an opening summary of the story, and the title gives the story a name. But writing is not necessarily in the temporal order of the final document or the IMRAD format. And this means you can actually jumble up the sequence of how you write it. The title is thought to be the most important part of the article. This is because it's first contact. It's the part most often read. It's the one that catches the eye first. It must therefore be able to stand alone. And furthermore, it's a determinant for the indexing process of the article, and it contributes largely to the visibility of the paper. The title, at a glance, should reflect the essence of the article. It must be direct and brief, specific, and jargon-free. In the title, you list the most important words associated with your research, the variables, the processes and procedures, outcomes, interventions, if any, experimental conditions. And then what you do is arrange the terms in logical order, connecting them with phrases or conjunctions or transition. And here you see that you write the title last. This is because it's easier or more natural to write up the content of your study and then think of a proper title for it, rather than write a title and then try to pattern everything after it. Statement check. The abstract does not have to follow the IMRAD format. True or false? The abstract presents the deciding point for the reader. Should they, at this juncture, read the whole article or not? Your abstract, therefore, should be a concise summary of the manuscript with no references. It should be quick to read, easy to understand, informative, but not too detailed. It must provide a brief overview of the current knowledge on the issue, summarize the methods that you did, and indicate your major findings. It may have statements showing the major implications of the paper, and this must be consistent with the study conclusions that would appear later on. When you write the abstract and the keywords, note that the number of words should generally be less than 150 for unstructured abstracts and less than 250 for structured abstracts. It must be written in the past tense and in passive voice, but do note that there are abstracts or papers written in the first person active voice. You see abstracts that go like, we conducted a study, we enrolled 350 patients, but some abstracts would sound like a total of 350 patients were enrolled and a study was conducted in the so-and-so. Your abstract, if written well, should be self-contained and able to stand alone without the need to consult the full text. It should not include references to literature or to figures and tables that are found in the body of the paper. Be sure that your abstract includes only information that is present in the paper. If you have abbreviations or acronyms, they should be spelled out on first use, and this is a rule that we follow all throughout the manuscript. You do this unless they are standard abbreviations or acronyms or are very well known to the general group of medical literature readers. The abstract must contain 3 to 10 keywords, usually placed below it, and the purpose of these is to assist indexers in cross-indexing the article, and terms from the mesh list of PubMed should be used to facilitate indexing and retrieval. So with regard to our statement earlier, the answer is true. The abstract does not have to follow the IMRAD format because it does not have a discussion section. Rather, from results, it's the conclusion part that follows. So it's more like IMRAP, but that's just a term that I coined. Let's talk about the introduction. This section must present the topic to the readers in a straightforward way. It must be short and focused. The suggested length, at least for some references, would be 3 paragraphs. The first, mentioning the questions or issues that outline the background of the study, wherein you establish context, relevance, or the nature of the problem. The second would take on the importance of the problem and discuss what is not known yet about it. The third would state the study rationale, the hypothesis, if any, the main objective or the purpose of the study. And you know that from the same section in your protocol, there's information that you can just lift from there and put it here. But of course, you have to do some fine reading and fine tuning so that it conforms with the current tense of the manuscript. Now, in the introduction, you do not present or anticipate data that you will present later. So do not give findings, do not give conclusions, do not preempt what you're going to say at the latter part. Some writers or authors would advocate writing the introduction at the end. And the opinion is that it becomes clearer and easier to write after the methods, results, and discussion have been completed. The next major part of the paper is the method section, whose aim is to give the reader all the necessary details to replicate the study. This is because any study must have a clear methodology that will allow replication or reproduction, wherein it is expected that the results that you would get would be the same if it were a well-conducted and well-prepared study. In the method section, try to check your work against the reporting guidelines as appropriate for the study design. For example, the consort statement for randomized trials, the STARD for diagnostic studies, the STROBE for observational studies, and the PRISMA statement for systematic reviews and meta-analysis. Be sure that you have the essential elements in the methodology section, and this will include a clear presentation of the study design, an identification or definition and description of the measurement parameters used in the study, the study design, sample selection, inclusion and exclusion criteria, data collection, data instruments, the analysis, and ethical considerations. Write the pre-specified primary and secondary outcomes and all the relevant variables. Describe statistical tests used, especially if they're not the usual. Statement check. The method section can just be copy-pasted as is from the protocol. True or false? This is false. While your method section may have all the essential elements that you can transport into your final manuscript, remember that you have to change it into the past tense in the final paper. In the protocol, you wrote it in the future tense, but now that it's done, it must be written in the past tense. Next major part and very important portion of the paper would be the results section. This should contain an organized presentation of the collected data, which should represent the answers to the study objectives. You may start with characteristics of the study participants and then go on to a descriptive analysis of what you found out. Statistical analysis that was done for the results should be adequately described, and this may include the usual measures of central tendency and dispersion, as well as univariate, bivariate, and multivariate analysis of associations. All measurements mentioned in methods must be reported in the results section in the same logical order. The past tense should be used. When presenting the findings of the research, keep in mind the objectives of the research. Results that do not relate to the research objectives should not be mentioned. The only exception probably is if you're doing post hoc analysis wherein you come across data that was not originally intended to be included but you decided would be important in the sense of clinical utility. Sufficient detail should be given to allow others to assess the accuracy and the precision of results of your study. In the results section, you report only data, whether this is positive or negative. The interpretation of these data must not be included. Results for primary and secondary outcomes can be reported using tables and figures for additional clarity. So you proceed in a logical sequence in the text, the tables, and illustrations. Figures and tables should be simple yet comprehensible on their own, bearing only the title, the footnotes, abbreviations, and comments. The figures and tables must elaborate textual information instead of just repeating it. And again, you must check for consistency across your manuscript. Tables and graphs, when used properly, are extremely helpful in summarizing large amounts of data. But do note that you must not repeat in the text the numerical data that's contained in the figures and tables. Also, you limit the number of tables and figures to those necessary to explain the argument of the paper and to support your findings. If exact values are important, a table is preferable to a graph. Graphs are appropriate to illustrate relationships. So, when trends and relationships are more important than exact values, a graph is more efficient. Remember that your tables and figures should be introduced in the text before they appear. They also must be numbered correctly so as not to cause confusion for your reader. They should be titled properly, and the title must exactly describe the content of that particular table or figure. And do not use them if the data can easily be presented in the text. My favorite example for that is information containing the sexes of the participants. If you can say there were 65% females and 35% males among the participants, then you do not have to show a pie chart demonstrating the same. Let's talk a bit about labeling tables and figures. This is a study by Makino et al. That tried to see the efficacy and tolerability of cosmetic serums enriched with hyaluronic acid as part of microdermabrasion treatments for facial skin dryness and age-associated features. So here we see the grading scale of clinically assessed efficacy parameters. And we're given the parameters on the leftmost column, and then the parameter gradings that go lowest from 0 to 9. And you see here, for example, for fine lines or fine wrinkles, 0 is none, and 9 is numerous, deep, and or long fine lines or fine wrinkles. But we will not go into detail regarding this. What we need to show here is that when you are using a table, the label must be at the top. That's the important message here. From the same study, here we see gradings of participants' self-perceived efficacy of facial and neck treatments immediately after application. So these statements were evaluated in response to certain prompts that were given. But again, we will not delve into those. But what I'd like to point out is that if you are showing a figure this time, your label should be at the bottom. Let's go now to the discussion. The main purpose of the discussion is to explain the meaning of the results. You create this part so that there is a natural flow of ideas. You may recap the key findings. You may deliberate whether they are consistent with the study objectives. State what your study adds to the current knowledge, the current status of things, and then name the strengths and the limitations of your research. Describe how the results are consistent or not with similar studies or studies that were done previously. Try to discuss confounding factors or possible reasons for discrepancies in the findings when compared to other studies. Avoid the following in your discussion: excessive wordiness, irrelevant information, repeating the results in detail, not interpreting and not critically analyzing the results of other studies that were reviewed and cited, overreaching the interpretation of the results, and overlooking the limitations of your study. It is best that you recognize your weak points rather than have them pointed out to you. These are reminders that may help us in writing the discussion regarding elements to include. So we recap the study's major findings. We explain the meaning and importance of the findings. Relate the findings to those of similar studies. Consider alternative explanations of the findings. State their clinical relevance. Acknowledge the limitations and make suggestions for further research. Finally, we come to the conclusion. A good paper ends with a strong, clear conclusion. This should be linked with the goals of the study and limited by the boundaries of that same study. Authors should avoid unqualified statements and conclusions that are not clearly supported by the data. For example, let us not make statements on economic benefits and costs unless the manuscript really includes economic data and analysis. And authors should refrain from claiming unjustified priority about the findings. Remember, a negative finding could be as important as a positive finding. In past decades, there was great emphasis on studies that had positive findings. But what if the truth really was about a negative finding? So do not ignore studies that give negative findings because they could just hold as much truth as the ones with positive findings. For the references, cite the sources of statements that are clearly not your own. Be consistent in the referencing style and follow the instructions of the department or the institution or the society that you're submitting to, or perhaps as basic as the requirements of the course. And use the term references rather than bibliography because the latter term is more geared towards literary or creative work. For acknowledgments, you should have one or more statements that should specify contributions that need acknowledging or recognition but do not justify authorship as recommended by the ICMJE. For example, you received general support from the department chair, or somebody helped you with the technical aspects, or somebody gave financial or material support. I'd like to remind you that when you write your papers, do not write your advisors' names under acknowledgments. The people who get to be written in acknowledgments are not co-authors, but your advisors are not just simply advisors, they're technically supervising co-researchers. So, because they are authors, they are your co-authors, or we are your co-authors, we are placed with the authorship lineup and not under acknowledgments. Just a brief note about reporting guidelines. If you go to the website of the equatornetwork.org, you will see that there are reporting guidelines for the main study types. And as I see that many of our studies are observational studies, then the one that we will follow is the strobe. But this is good review for all the reporting guidelines of the different types of articles or study designs. So it might be worth a look when you have extra time to go into the checklists of all these guidelines. In other writing workshops, there are devoted sessions on general rules of writing, grammar, and syntax. But this is beyond the scope of our talk today, so I'm just going to leave you with some general tips, some writing tips. When you write, please keep your pronouns consistent with the subjects in the sentences. So when we say the girl, we say she, the men, we say they. But let us note that in conformity to recent times, there have been referencing styles that recognize the use of they as a singular third person pronoun. And this is particularly true for individuals whose genders are unknown or are not shared. So it's all right to say the participant and then they decline. So let's just remember that. Spell out the numbers below 10. Never start a sentence with a numerical figure. Write the number in words. This is easy when the number is short. For example, 10 participants were interviewed. That's TEN. But if your figure is 18,589, you can write that entire thing, or you can do another maneuver like a total of 18,000 something something were enrolled. Just don't start your sentence with numbers. Always cite the source of a passage, statement, or image that is not yours. Check and recheck all the entries for correctness and consistency. Avoid being too wordy. Stay with straightforward language. When writing citations, the period should come before the superscript, but after the close parenthesis. No surprises, please. See to it that something you write in the middle part of the paper was introduced at an earlier part. Title for table should appear above. Labels for figures should appear below. In summary, research is an essential part of our medical profession, and publication is often an indicator of research success. Therefore, research paper writing is an important skill in this field. One would have greater chances of being published when the research manuscript is written well, and therefore a knowledge of general format and contents of such, as well as writing skills, are crucial. These are my references. And with that, I'd like to end, and I thank you for your attention. If you have any questions or clarifications, please feel free to email me at mstolosa@uerm.edu.ph. Thank you and have a good day, everyone.